I've run into a lot of strange things in TF2, and back when I was porting Junction to Source 2, I came across one of the strangest things I'd ever seen, and it sits in this room right here. This is a cluster of boxes that makes up the prop Box Cluster 01, and this is another cluster of boxes that makes up the prop Box Cluster 02. Here they are placed side by side on a test map. If I were to tell you that there's a third cluster of boxes called Box Cluster 03, what do you think it'd look like? Whatever it is, it probably isn't this. Right now what you're seeing is Box Cluster 03, and I promise it only gets weirder from here. This video is sponsored by manco.store, a TF2 marketplace where you can buy and sell TF2 items for real money. I've personally used them many times in the past and can vouch for their great prices and low fees. You can check them out through the link in the description. When I first saw this, the first thing I did was ask if anybody else was seeing what I was, and it turns out that people were, but they didn't realize it. That or nobody cared enough to mention it because I can't find a single post on the internet talking about this prop, so that's exactly what I'm gonna do. First of all, what's causing this prop to look this way? If I run the command rDrawModelStaticOverlay1 in the console, a set of text appears over each prop. For Box Cluster 1 and 2, we can see at the very bottom that the material being referenced is called ShelfProps01. If I go to that directory in GCFscape, I can see the corresponding image texture, or VTF, which looks like this. For those of you who have never seen something like this before, this is an atlas, a texture file made up of multiple smaller images used for different assets. It exists to reduce file size since in this case, one 1024 by 1024 image file containing the textures for multiple props is much more efficient than a bunch of smaller image files for each unique one. Anyway, we can see the textures for the cardboard boxes right here in the middle. And to visualize how these textures are being applied to the boxes, I went ahead and ported them to Blender. If I go into edit mode and select the box's faces, you can see exactly which parts of the atlas they correspond with. By selecting the entire cluster, we can see the entire texture region occupied by the prop. In fact, both the first and second cluster occupy the same region. Going back to Box Cluster 03, you'd think that its textures would also be somewhere in this atlas, but it turns out that the material being referenced is something completely different. Instead of ShelfProps01, it's getting its textures from HandTruck01. What is a hand truck? This is a hand truck, and this is what its texture file looks like. In Blender, this is how it's being mapped onto the prop. Doesn't look like a cardboard box, does it? The props VMT file, which is the text file responsible for defining the texture file and other material parameters, is literally HandTruck01. How in the world did this even happen? It's not just that Valve selected the wrong material, because if I change it back to ShelfProps01, it's still all jacked up, leading me to believe that there might be another texture atlas or file somewhere that lines up with these two boxes' UVs, because they're laid out in a very specific way that looks at least somewhat intentional. So I searched through TF2's assets for anything mentioning shelf props, cardboard, and boxes, but I couldn't find anything that matched. I was stumped, and while I had no answers, I knew someone who might. Sean is the guy who created Junction back in 2008, and seeing as he's the one who placed this prop in the map, surely he'd have an answer. So I asked him, "Yo, I have a question." "Hey, what's your question?" "There's a prop on Junction called Box Cluster 03. I assume it didn't look like this back when you made the map originally?" "Yeah, probably didn't look like that, but I really don't remember specifics from it cause it's been so long." So there you have it. The actual person who placed the prop doesn't even know what happened. But as he said, it probably didn't look like that, right? I mean, how could you not notice something like this when building the map in Hammer? At this point, I figured there might have been an update at some point that broke this prop. So I went to steamdb.info and downloaded the oldest version of TF2 they had, which was only from 2013. Keep in mind that Junction was added to the game in 2009. Again, using GCFscape, I went to the same directory, extracted the model, and opened it in Half-Life Model Viewer, and to my surprise, it was still screwed up. So then maybe this corruption happened at some point between the map's release in 2009 and this build of the game in 2013. But with no way of accessing the game's files within this time period, I only had one other option: to search the internet for footage showing that box. So I went to YouTube and searched for TF2 Junction before 2010 to see the first ever footage of this map. There were only a handful of videos to look through, and as I made my way through these sub 720p videos, my hopes were dropping. But as soon as it seemed like I wasn't gonna catch a glimpse of it, this happened. For a dozen or so frames at 480p quality, you can barely make out Box Cluster 03 in the corner of the screen. And while it appears to look slightly different than what we see today, that honestly might just be because of the poor video quality, it's still just as corrupt as it is today. This video by Vicio Games was uploaded on March 14th, 2009, less than a month after the Scout update, which is when Junction came out. So, there's our answer. Unless the Scout update ruined Box Cluster 03, it looks like it was this way to begin with. And to corroborate this idea, I looked through a bunch of other TF2 maps, including all of Valve's maps, to see if they also contain Box Cluster 03, and here's what I found. Gorge, Double Cross, Freight, Granary, Process, Snakewater, Man Manor, Mountain Lab, Badwater, Barn Blitz, Frontier, Hoodoo, Thunder Mountain, Pipeline, Viaduct, Harvest, Kong King, Doomsday, Cold Town, and Manhattan all have one or more instances of Box Cluster 01 or Box Cluster 02, but not a single instance of Box Cluster 03. Even though it probably existed in the game since it came out in 2007, Box Cluster 03 was only used one time, which was on Junction. I find this to be a great shame because had this box been textured correctly, we'd probably see it used in dozens of TF2 maps, judging by how many of them already use Box Cluster 1 and 2. So what can we do about this atrocity? Well, if you look at this prop on my Source 2 port of Junction, you'll see that it actually looks normal, because there's no way in heck I was going to leave it that way. How did I do this? Over in Blender, I took each UV island, or set of faces, and transformed them to be within the same texture space used for the other two props. They don't match perfectly, but they're good enough to the point where any reasonable person wouldn't notice anything off. I mean, this box has been this way longer than some of you have been alive, and nobody said anything. But now, approximately 15 years later, Box Cluster 03 can finally be recognized with its two siblings. You can find a link to it in the description, so go nuts with it, and I look forward to seeing it finally get used and appreciated in TF2 maps. Thank you for watching. This is LED, switching off.